If you with it, drop it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Explore the Opportunities with AI, the podcast that uncovers the transformative power of artificial intelligence. And today we want to focus in leadership and business. And I am very welcome Emily Sander, the former C-suite executive turned leadership coach, to discover the role of chief of staff, especially in the AI startup. So, with over 15 years of experience, including roles of Chief of Staff and VP of Strategies, Emily brings invaluable insight and unique challenge faced hopefully by the AI startup today that she can share with us. All the golden nuggets. And she also a founder and CEO of Next Level Coaching and having her own podcast. A lot of experiences and expertise that Emily can share with us today. So I am really excited to have her and really appreciate her time coming on today. So welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you so much, Serena.
Yeah, before we begin, can you please share with us like a little bit about your background and your journey and what inspired you to transition into a C-suite executive to leadership coach?
Yes, I started my career at large corporations, so Microsoft and Amazon. My claim to fame at Amazon was I was on the testing team for the original Kindle device. And so we worked on
Mhm.
that and we had to be very confidential, couldn't talk to family and friends about what we were doing. And we launched that right before Christmas in '07. And that opened up some doors to a series of small to medium technology enabled businesses, I would describe them. So
Mhm.
startups and just small to medium businesses. Those were all private equity backed companies. And so rapid growth and leadership opportunities that presented themselves to people who could just go in there, figure it out, get stuff done. And so that was me. And so I rose through the ranks quite quickly and got opportunities that I don't think I would have in larger organizations. And then that
Mhm.
culminated in a role as chief of staff for a digital marketing company. And the PE firm that I worked with before and a CEO I had worked with before both contacted me and said, "Hey, Emily, do you want to basically smoke jump into this investment, turn it around for 18 months, and then jump out?" And I was like, "Sure, sounds good." COVID hit,
Wow.
turned out to be 5 years in that role, which was great, like in some ways and horrible in others. I had my eye on my coaching practice before the 18 months started. And so I thought 18 months, I can do it on the side. It's not that long. This seems like a good opportunity. And so for 5 years, I was building up my coaching practice in parallel. So on at nights,
Mhm.
on weekends, just slow dripping this thing, nudging it forward here and there. And then there came to a point in the a Y in the road, a fork in the road, through a series of circumstances where I had the opportunity to either continue with the next kind of step or next rung up the ladder in the corporate career, or hey, let's go all in on coaching and let's do it. And I set myself up to do it for a year. And I said, I have to at least get to certain points and prove it to myself in a year to continue. But I decided to do that. And it's been 2.5, almost 3 years now. And it's been a fantastic, fantastic journey and experience. And it had highs and lows and ups and downs and all of the roller coaster that comes with it. But I basically get to wake up and do the favorite part of my day from all the previous roles I had, which was the one-on-one mentoring and guiding and advising people and just helping leaders, businesses get to their next level. And I'm like, I love it. So I love waking up. I love doing what I do. And on the side of that or within all that, I get to speak with people like you. So it's a
Aw,
pretty good life.
that's amazing. So we would love to hear all about the high and the low. But before we begin, I really want for you to explain what is chief of staff role.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the short answer is the right-hand partner to the CEO. So chief of staff
Mhm.
will report to a principal, and they'll also
Mhm.
work very closely with the executive leadership team. So the analogy that
Mhm.
I like to use is like the six-pack cans of soda you get at the store,
Yes, yes.
and the plastic thing on top of the cans that holds all the cans together.
Yes.
That is the
That's
chief of
chief.
staff. Yes. So it holds
That's
executives
amazing.
together. It's kind of connective tissue, adaptable, flexible, and just keeps everyone on track, make sure everyone is rowing in the same direction. So that's my short answer.
I love it. Yes, because I remember reaching out to you. I was like, well, I was appointed chief of staff. And then I was like, can you tell me what staff's supposed to do? Because right now I'm just doing all of the marketing. And I'm like, there's something else I have to step into because of my title. So that's how we met, right? So I'm really appreciative of you. Just give me that 30 minutes of explaining where I should step up and what are the goals, right? Chief of staff can be almost anything that the company needs it to be.
Yeah, you're exactly
Correct.
right. So the chief of staff role is a lot of people have context for it in the military and politics because it's been there for a while, but it's relatively
Mm-hmm.
new. And I would classify
Mm-hmm.
it as still an emerging role in the private sector, in business. And it's interesting you mentioned marketing because I actually, as chief of staff, took over our corporate marketing, so corporate branding and product marketing as well. And so basically, especially with startups and small companies, chiefs of staff are doing a lot of gap filling. So they're actually stepping
Mm-hmm.
into head of marketing or into an interim COO type role. So they will actually
Right.
perform the acting functional heads of departments. And then as the company grows, they might be in charge of recruiting and hiring for that long-term leader. So I was in charge, I was on point for hiring our CTO, our COO, and involved in our CFO recruiting process. And so I would gap fill and then I would also help recruit and build a process around the long term plan of the company. So it was funny that
Mm-hmm.
you did marketing too, because and I see chiefs of staff doing sales operations and marketing quite a bit because at early stages, the front end parts of the business are so important, right? So it's not uncommon, but it's funny that we have that in common.
So, do you feel like chief of staff required to have a broad knowledge of the overall business operations, technical, like the border, the better, or
Yeah, it's
yeah?
certainly a
Mhm.
generalist role more so than a specialist role. However, depending on the version or flavor of chief of staff or setup of chief of staff you might, like I had to learn about digital marketing enough to be dangerous, right? Because I work for a digital marketing company. And I would say it's generally broad. So you want someone who can see across the entire business. So anything
Mhm.
from marketing and sales to product and finance and compliance and strategic partnerships and M&A and investor relations. That the chief of staff has to have all of that. And I
Mhm.
say they sit above department lines, not meaning they're
Mhm.
better than anyone else or they're more important, but they have a different vantage point and they have a different focus point. So like a COO would be in charge of operations, a CFO in charge of finance. The chief
Mhm.
product officer should know the most about the product than anyone else in the company. They should know the people, they should know the process, they should know everything. The
Mhm.
staff will have a working knowledge of all the functional areas, but be able to see across the board, be able to see the whole board and say, oh, chief product officer is doing one thing that's not exactly corresponding with what the chief financial officer thinks is happening. I need to connect those dots or connect those two leaders, or same thing with sales and operations and so forth. That's another unique aspect of the chief of staff role, which I found so rewarding and just so cool, is you get to see across the company. A lot of chiefs of
Mhm.
staff will go in to a startup and they will maybe have some work experience in one area, but they will have a huge learning opportunity about all facets of a business by being chief of staff. And some founders and CEOs will then, as the company matures, deploy their chief of staff into a functional head officially. I'm going to make you my COO officially. Now we have a
Mhm.
huge operations department, and I need someone who knows how all of the business works together and then can still fit into that functional head role for operations.
Oh my God, so that's perfect transitioning. So today, of course, we want to focus on AI, especially AI startup, hence this show, Explore the Opportunities with AI. Yeah, so when I reached out to you, I'd also shared that I've been into the AI startup space, and then I start seeing a lot of companies are looking for a role chief of staff. And so I really want to have your expertise to explain this fast growing AI startup space. So, what do you think? A lot of AI companies are getting funded, right? So, they could be from like a team of 4 people and then they got 30 million. So, then they have to scale quickly, right? So, do you feel like that's when a role of chief of staff coming in? And what do you feel like? What are the challenges for AI startup if they don't have a role of chief of staff?
Yeah. So let me take one of those questions at a time. I think
I
that
know, I'm
when
sorry.
no, no worries. Those are all good questions. I was trying to keep track of them in my head. In terms of scaling, and that's where you do bring in a chief of staff, I would say a chief of staff at the very beginning, if you're 4 people, everyone's doing a bit of everything. It's all hands on
Right.
deck and you jump in where you're needed. I coach chiefs of staff who are in that situation. I'm the chief of staff. I'm also the chief of operations and the chief HR officer and the chief of janitorial services because it's all hands on deck at this stage of the process. But once you get that funding and once you have to scale rapidly, you can help with arms and legs and do the work yourself just to kickstart it, like just to ignite the thing. And sometimes that's the role of a chief of staff. In parallel to that, and this is where some people they're doing multiple jobs at once, but that's startup life. You also have to build the process. So it's have you ever seen like those oversized load trucks coming down the
Yes,
highway
yes,
where they take
yes.
3 or 4 lanes? Yeah, and people are like have lights and cones and everything. It's like those things where like they have half a house on the back of a truck and it's a huge
Mhm.
thing moving down the highway and they're going fast. And it's like that, but you're trying to build the next layer of the house as you're moving down the highway. So they
Yeah.
help build the house, but also help the process of, okay, who's the team we need? What's the repeatable process we can do? Okay, we've had 4 people and we can do a certain amount if we just work harder, but there's no way we can scale to what we need it to be
Mhm.
with that $30 million. So you have to build the
Right.
process and bring the people in for the company to be able to scale. You are
Mhm.
also so there's like the internal process of that. You're probably
Mhm.
branding yourself differently externally. So the narrative of your company and the narrative and story arc of your founder and founding team changes. And
Mhm.
here's the secret sauce. The role
Mhm.
of the founder and the other 2 or 3 people on your team, their roles change. And you need to
Right.
help them and coach them evolve in their roles because just like you can't be throwing arms and legs at a problem and just working harder, like working more nights, you run out of hours in a day. Your founder has to lift out and be doing other things. The other founding team members have to lift out of that and play a more strategic role. That I see that get skipped so many times. I see that founders are just deep diving into let me review all the Jira tickets that come in still. Whereas before made sense that the CEO founder reviews all the Jira tickets, but at this point you need to be fundraising, you need to be at conferences, you need to be talking to strategic partners. So that's your role. It's no longer looking at every single Jira ticket that comes in.
So, if an AI startup need to find a new role for chief of staff, what should they look for?
It depends on what you're trying to do with the role. So let's take your example of 4 people. Well, it depends on who your other people are existing.
Right.
At that
Mhm.
point, at that stage of things, you can build it around the talent and skills that you have in house. Further down the line, you don't want to build it on like personality dependent. But earlier in that stage, it depends on who you have. If you have someone really strong in operations, maybe you need someone strong in marketing. If you don't
Mhm.
have someone strong in operations and you have product people and engineers, then you might need someone to fill that operational role. If you work in a industry that is heavily regulated, you might need someone who has a legal or compliance background to come in and
Mhm.
help. So it just you want to look at your team as a whole and say what would be a complementary skill set to what I have, but also someone who can help us get to the next level. So it's like fitting
Mhm.
pie piece in a pie, but also making that pie like 3D, like a cylinder. I don't know if that analogy works, but taking it to the next level or next dimension. So that's the first thing I would look for. And then with AI, that's changing so fast right now that you have to have someone who's adaptable and is not afraid of change and doesn't want to come in, punch in, punch out. Let me do like
Right.
the list of 1 through 10 over and over again, rinse and repeat. I had a client that was working with her company on having promptathons, so teaching people how to prompt AI, and that was great, and that was novel, and that was, like, 12 months ago, and now that's outdated, and she's doing new things, and so it's just changing so quickly. So being able to take in the new information, take in the new technology and what it can do, and then being, like, creative about it and saying, "Okay, how can I apply this internally to my internal team and processes, but also externally for our customers?" And there's like infinite ways that you can do that. So I would say adaptable, nimble, creative, and just
Mhm.
you can complement your existing team in those ways as well.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I would want to ask you, when we're looking at the pie of the company and what's missing, and we're focused on looking for a chief of staff who can actually help us fill that hole and expertise. But at the same time, do you look for somebody, for example, if somebody need help with marketing, are you looking for someone who has like a impressive background in marketing and you can turn them into chief of staff, or you're looking for somebody who has the chief of staff roles already at different company with stronger background, and then you bring them in as the chief of staff?
That's a good question. So I would lean toward the latter. So go for someone who has chief of staff skills who happens to have a slant toward marketing.
Gotcha.
The other approach, which you alluded to there, which is a good point, if you have a team and you're like, okay, I have a team of 4 or 5 people, and someone shows chief of staff like traits, oh, maybe I can pop them out to a chief of staff role. That's another way to go about having a chief of staff on your team. A common thing that I'm seeing more and more now from VC funds and from PE firms is they will almost insist that a founder will get a chief of staff if they're going to invest in their company. And that chief
Gotcha.
of staff will be not more senior than the others per se, but they will have scaled the company before. So they know what it
Mm,
can look like. They know how this process goes and can just be that right hand advisor and that confidant of the founder, of their principal throughout that process. And again, can work very closely with the leadership team and kind of coach them through it. The founder is often a genius in their field and they've created something out of nothing and found a gap in the market that they can fill. That doesn't mean they're an expert at VC funding or, PE investors or scaling a business 10x,
mhm.
20x, all these different things. So those are just two different skill sets. And if you can have someone who's been there, done that, and you can just lean on, where you can go be a genius in your field and have this person who helps with the rest, that's another very common partnership.
So, how can chief of staff effectively support founders in managing this rapid growth and at the same time bringing the company culture to also supporting this goal?
Yes. So culture is by design. You want it to be by design
Mhm.
instead of default because if you're running around crazy like a chicken with your head cut off,
Mhm.
the default will be
Mhm.
crazy with chicken with your head cut off. And that's not the environment you want people to work in. Now, I
Right.
totally get
Mhm.
like the thrill of like it's startup, we're switching stuff over, we're yelling across the cubicles or tables or whatever. I've been there, I've done it, I love it. I understand the thrill, but there is also that tipping point when with 4 or 5 people, it's easy. Just sit in a conference room. Once you get to 15, 20, 25, that becomes a little bit different. And certainly when you get to 50 and 100 people, you need to design that culture. And so it is a chief of staff can help by one, making sure this is something that the group is thinking about. The leadership team
Mhm.
group is like, oh, actually, we need to think about this and be proactive about this and not just default to something. What do we want to stand for? What are our core values? What do we want our business to be like when people come to work here? How do we want people to interact? What types of not only the hard skills, but what types of people and personalities and character traits are we trying to attract to our business?
Mhm.
All of that is baked in. And then that's the core of it. And then if you think of like expanding concentric circles from that, okay, once you know your core values and what you want to be about, then how do you go about communicating that to your team? How do you go about onboarding new hires? How do you go about setting up the structure and processes throughout your business so managers and
Mhm.
directors and VPs are supported in that and can help foster that culture? I was just talking to a chief of staff the other day, and he was working on getting ideas and like feedback and input and innovation from everyone in the company, because a lot of people were doing it at like the director and up level, but they wanted ideas from everyone in the company, including rank and file folks, including new hires who had fresh eyes. And so he was putting together this process to collect this information, but also let the directors, mid-level managers, and leads know, hey, we want to hear from you, so please, like, you send the message out to your teams as well, that we want to hear direct from customer facing folks, from new people
Mhm.
who might not have our historical biases and all these things. So a chief of staff can really be key in shaping that culture and
Mhm.
coaching the leaders again. Hey, when we were 5 people, like, you could have a bad day, you could show up, you could do whatever, but now understand people look at you differently, and how you show up and how you conduct yourselves in meetings and how you interact with people in the hallway or on Zoom matters. And every single one of those interactions
Mhm.
and touch points designs the culture.
So, is there a balance between like rapidly demanding technology and growth, and then also a human aspect of like leadership?
Of course there is, Serena. Yeah, of course there is. And that's just a decision and culture that you have to decide on. I worked in organizations or departments where it's let me burn people out. I'm going to run them as hard as possible for as long as possible and just whip them
Mhm.
harder to go. And then they burn out and then they leave. And that is a strategy. It's not one I would advocate for, but it is a strategy. And then there's ones
Mhm.
where I don't you can probably overdo this. I see this where people are so sensitive to, "Oh, I'm sorry. Were you offended or I made you like work hard? I'm so sorry." You can go too far
Yeah.
the other way where it's like, "Hey, look, I want to treat you
Mm.
with respect. I want you to be rewarded for your good work. I want you to have creative ideas and to be heard and to be engaged in
Mhm.
this process. But at the end of the day, I also do need you to get your stuff done. And so if you can't do that or are unwilling to do that, then there is towing that line too. But there's a lot of gray area in between that. There's a lot of
Right.
engagement. And I think my teams were well run and people knew what was expected of them, but they also knew that they would get credit for things. And they also knew
Mhm.
that I wanted to hear from them and that I actually listened. Just a really quick story. I had this person who was new on my team and he had this great idea. And I was like, Steve, oh my gosh, like, we've been doing it like this forever. And you just came up with this new idea. And it turned into this, it snowballed into this cross company thing. And I had him
Mhm.
present a very short segment at our board meeting because this generated with him, and he just spoke about what had happened and how they were kicking it off and everything. And he was like, you want me to present at the board? And I was like, yeah, for a short segment, we'll tee it up and I'll work with you on how to present and all that. But I think there is that dynamic where it's like, look, I expect you to work hard and I expect you to get stuff done and take care of our customers, but I also want to
Mhm.
invest in you and have you grow
Right.
professionally and personally, and I will be
Mhm.
more than happy to give you opportunities to do these things. And I think when people feel that and when they experience that, when they trust that, they flourish.
Mhm.
I've seen people just
Oh.
flourish and, oh, okay, if that's the environment I'm in, then let me just bloom right in front of you and do things that they themselves never thought possible. And even I, as a leader, am like, oh, I didn't know you had that in you. But when you put people in the right environment, then they will do things you don't expect.
Oh my God. I just listened to this podcast and there's this book I can't think of my head, and she said exactly like the way that you said it. It's yes, you want to be nice and all, but then at the same time, you want your employee to be accountable. And yeah, there's just metaphor that she wrote a whole book about it. I wish I remember, but which is exactly like how you explained it. But right now, my brain it just go blank, so I
No
can only
worries.
think about what are the questions that I'm gonna ask.
Well, the point I think
Where-
you pulled out the most important point. You pulled out the most important point, which is you can be nice and hold people accountable. Those aren't mutually exclusive. So you can do both. And in fact,
Mhm.
I think I know that people like to know what's expected and they like to know where they stand. So if you're always like, "Oh no, it's okay," da da da, they actually like to know where the line is and they like to know how to
Mhm.
do a good job. And so if you tell them
Yeah,
that, I think
right.
again people
Uh-huh.
have solid footing to stand on.
And you're helping them by telling them and pushing them, because if you don't, you are actually backfire. You're not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was what that whole book was about. So yeah, that's amazing that you're sharing that. I also want to ask, do you know the numbers? What are the growth rate of a chief of staff role right now? Just like maybe what you're seeing. Do you see the trend and what your predicament are for chief of staff role, especially in the AI startup?
Not specifically an AI startup. Right now, this role is growing exponentially, especially in the US. So I would say the US kind of leads the charge in this area. And then around the world, I think fast follow would be like certain parts of Europe. And then it's very nascent in other parts. I was just speaking with someone in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, the other day, and she was like, no one knows what this is outside of politics. So I have to explain it every time. I think it is becoming pretty ubiquitous in the
Right.
US. When you say chief of staff, people have heard of that. Now, they might not know exactly what that means in business. And to your point earlier, it depends on like the company you're talking about and the stage of company and the principle you have on exactly how they set it up and exactly how being chief of staff, like what that entails and what that means in every single
Mhm.
instance. But people know it. It's funny. I would say maybe 50% of the chiefs of staff and principals and businesses I work with, the principal or the investor was the one who said, "You need a chief of staff." So it wasn't someone
Cool.
raising their hand saying, "I wanna be chief of staff." Sometimes that happens, but a lot more it's someone else saying, "You need a chief of staff right now." So I think that's an interesting update.
You're, you're so right, because I am working for an investor and he was like, "Oh, chief of staff," and I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, you need one.
That is so true. So how can they be prepared, or how can they? What are your advices for them to grow into these roles?
What's my advice for someone to grow into a chief of staff role?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's no like in accounting, it's like you go through the accounting classes. If law has a pretty direct, medical doctors have pretty direct routes. But with chief of staff, actually a broad experience. So having experience in different aspects of the business is actually an advantage. I have a lot of chiefs of
Mm-hmm.
staff who are coming to me saying, "Emily, can you help me get a chief of staff role?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." They're like, I have all this disparate experience and it looks horrible on a resume." I'm like, "Good news for you. That's great for chief of staff because it means you can do
Really?
a lot of different things." Absolutely. And then there's
That's
people who have transferable skills like project management, or maybe they're good at communication or coaching or helping people upskill and up level in that way. Maybe they have had the experience of scaling operations. Like all of those things are transferable skills. So if you can
mm-hmm.
showcase, I tell people who haven't been a chief of staff before, who want to get in that, showcase the things that you do that are the X factor, that are the intangible things. So highlight the
Mm-hmm.
cross department initiatives that you've been on point for or involved in. What's a time when you had to go figure something out where you're like, "I don't know what this is, but I've been given this. So let me go figure it out. Here's what we did with it." What's a time when you started something from scratch, got it to 10% or 50% or even 80%, and then handed it off? Because you will be gap
Mm-hmm.
filling, starting something, and then handing it off to someone, a whole bunch as chief of staff. When have you spoken truth to power, where you've sat in a conference room and everyone is saying this one thing, and you have to say something contrary, where it's like, "Hey, we need to think about this aspect. When is a time that you have done that?" So all of these different kind of X factor, behind the scenes things that make a big difference, highlight those. And a lot of people have trouble with, "I'm doing those behind the scenes things, but I don't know how to explain it or turn it into something tangible." What I would say there is take the end result of what you were a part of and use
Mhm.
that as, hey, I helped stand up this team. And so the operations throughput went from X to Y. So before and
Right.
after. And maybe you weren't the head of operations per se, but you were
Mhm.
certainly involved in standing up that process behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So that's an example
Mhm.
where you can make an intangible into a concrete outcome.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so this is focus a lot on leadership. Do you feel like if someone who has like high potential, like always stepped in and take that initial step and lead, do you feel like if they are and if they have those kind of trait, they should really trying to build the careers around chief of staff?
Yeah, it depends on what you wanna do. Chief of staff, again, is a great learning opportunity for someone early in their career at certain companies. It's the end all be all penultimate role for some other people. Like, I made it to chief of staff. I'm in the C-suite. I'm part of the leadership team. I'm the right-hand person to the CEO. I'm the proxy of the CEO, and I don't
Mhm.
wanna be a CEO. I like being behind the scenes, and I'm fine with them getting the spotlight, and
Mhm.
that's a great career role. A lot of people have it mid-career, and they will be in the chief of staff role for a certain period, and then they'll go off to either be a department head or they'll go off to run a
Mhm.
company. I see that a lot. I actually have a
Mhm.
chief of staff now who was told, again, by a PE firm, "We want you to go get operational hands-on experience and then come back to the fund level and work for us, but we want you to be, like, hands-on and know what it's like to be in the operations." And so they had him be chief of staff at one of their portcos, one of their portfolio companies. So he's doing a
Mhm.
run there, and then he's gonna go back up to the fund level. So it can be used in a lot of different ways. One other example I'll throw out real quick is I've seen companies have chief of staff be a rotational role. So for 2 years, someone will be chief of staff, and again, learn all about the different facets of the company, all the different departments, and how they work together, and then they'll be
Mhm.
deployed into like a VP role or some other leadership role. And then over time, you will accumulate leaders that know all of the business. And when you have that's a huge advantage for companies. So if you can build that into your process and into your long-term strategy, I've seen this work very well for people and for companies.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting because I didn't think that's possible. I didn't even know. Anyway, so in your books on leadership, can you share with us what books that you wrote and what you're working on? And then also, you have a fantastic podcast. And yeah, can you please share with us a little bit about also your coaching practices too?
Sure. I have 3 books. So the first one is called Hacking Executive Leadership, and that is just tools and frameworks for leaders that they can use. I wrote that during COVID and was just all the things that I said over and over again to people that helped them. And I was like, "Oh, let me get this out to more people." The best way to do that is to write a book. So that's just literally it's a quick read and you can just thumb through it and pick out tools and frameworks and, "Oh, I can go apply that communication framework," or, "Oh, I can go apply that recruiting tip
Mhm.
and trick to my workflow right now." The second book
Right.
I wrote is an insider's perspective on the chief of staff, why you need one and how to be a great one, which, as the title suggests, talks all about the chief of staff role. And if you want to be one, how do you excel in it? If you're thinking about being a chief of staff, pick it up and read through it. Be like, yep, this is for me, or ooh, nope, not quite my cup of tea. If you are a principal and you're looking for a chief of staff, or you have a chief of staff and you want to know, how do I optimize this role? How do I set this up? And what does a chief of staff need to succeed? That's a great book for you. And then my third book, which should be releasing in 1 to 2 weeks from
Oh
now, is On
my
Ramp to Exit. And that is about the private equity experience. So I actually co authored that with my former
yay.
CEO and CFO. And it's just, we've been on both sides of a PE investment on the managing leadership team and then on the investment side. And so we wanted to
Mhm.
write about that process in a way that normal people could understand. Because when you say
Yeah.
private equity investments, a lot of people's eyes glaze over, and we wanted to make that just approachable and readable for people. And it's namely meant for founders and
Mhm.
management teams who are going into the private equity process for the first time and are like, what
Mhm.
just happened? My snow
Mhm.
globe just got shook really hard. What just happened? What does this all mean? pick up the book. Again, it's a straightforward read. And we kept the acronyms to a minimum and explained ourselves so anyone can read that. But those are the three books that are out. And then, as you mentioned, thank you for mentioning it, I have a podcast called Leveraging Leadership, and it's for business leaders who want to level up and serve the people around them better. And I feature a number of chiefs of staff and principals on that show as well.
Yes, and lots of golden nuggets. You really have to go listen, because I've listened to a few and it's so much to learn. Like that's and you're just so easy to listen to and it's very fascinating. So it's hard to find a podcast like that. Yeah.
Well,
And
thank
I'm
you.
just
I
so
appreciate it.
glad. I'm just so glad. It's so thankful that what a better person to go to than to talk about chief of staff in the AI startup. So I know the next book is coming out, and I feel like all of our entrepreneurs, AI startup founders need to go get them. Can you just spill the beans and share like a few principles that are gonna help change their whole company or just benefit them from growing and scaling quickly?
Sure. In perspective of the PE investors.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah. So the biggest thing would be you're going to report out a lot of more information than you are now. So if it's like, hey, where's this SOP? Oh, like Brad has that on a napkin. You're gonna have to document that, and you're gonna have to
Yeah.
get accounting principles in place and all these things. So the sooner you do that, the better. Doesn't need to happen like day one. Be scrappy and just get the stuff done, MVP, get it launched, iterate. But at the point where you're talking about potential PE investors, you probably want to take some time and spend some internal cycles professionalizing your organization, because it's only going to help you with the discussions with the PE folks. Because we talked about this in the book, is once you get past initial diligence where they look around at your company and you get into confirmatory diligence, that's a huge, long, in-depth process, and you need to be ready for that. And if you have your ducks in a row and have
Mhm,
everything there for them, then
mhm.
they will trust you more and feel more comfortable with what they're buying, and your valuation goes up. Conversely, if you're like, we don't know where that is, we didn't do that, we were creative accounting on that, we didn't quite do that to gap rules or whatever, they're going to go, okay, then the valuation is going to go down. Or if
Gotcha.
you lie to them or don't have something at that point. So I would just say, take the time to build things the right way. I know you're moving
Right.
fast and you don't have to have everything be perfect, but if you can take a little bit of time, especially if you're going into those PE discussions or even with the investment bank, then take some time to put some of those processes in place so you at least have something to show them instead of Brad's napkin or sticky note on his computer type of thing. But there's a ton more to go into. That's just the first thing that popped into my head because Ed and Rory and I were just talking about that right before I popped on. But please check that out. If you're like, I might
Yeah,
actually want
definitely.
to get investors, what am I getting
Right.
myself into here? What are the pros and cons? Then On Ramp to
Mhm.
Exit is definitely a book for you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely would highly recommend any founder before raising, just even to check off all of that first before you start pitching and talking to your investors. Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily, to be on our show and sharing all of the golden nuggets and all things chief of staff. So I really appreciate you. Thanks. Bye.